Hello, my name is Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. This last week, I was reading a fascinating article from NeuroLaunch on the power of nicknames. The author says that our nicknames are more than just alternative names, they're little stories, capsules of identity, and bridges between people. These monikers wield a profound influence on our lives, shaping our identities, defining who we are. They're like little verbal tattoos, etching themselves into our psyches and coloring the way that we see ourselves and how other people perceive us. You and I know a lot of people who go by nicknames. Some of them are just shortened versions of their real name, like we would call an Alexander Alex, or Elizabeth we call Liz. Some of them describes our relationships. Everybody called my grandmother Ma. I have a friend who everybody calls Sis. Some people have nicknames, and to be honest, we're not really sure what the nickname means or how they got the nickname. For instance, when we used to live in Franklin, Tennessee, I knew a guy named Pork Chop. Not really sure how he got that name, but everybody called him Pork Chop. If you're watching television or you're reading a book, you're going to come across a lot of characters that have nicknames. We have people like Conan the Barbarian, or Dennis the Menace, or Dora the Explorer. Those nicknames give us a clue about the nature or the character of the person, because Conan is actually a barbarian. Dennis is actually a menace, and, well, Dora loves to explore. In our text today, we're going to meet somebody else with a nickname. But before we get into the text, I probably need to give you a little background. The nation of Israel has been wandering in the wilderness for the last 40 years. Now, it wasn't supposed to be that way. According to Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2, the whole journey from Egypt to the Promised Land should have taken about 11 days. But because of their disobedience, a whole generation of people end up having to die in the wilderness. For 40 years, the children of Israel wander. And for those 40 years, God takes care of their every need. And the way that they repay God is that the children of Israel murmur, complain, talk about how much better it was way back in Egypt when we were treated harshly like slaves. But now there's this new generation of people. And once again, they're standing at the edge of the Promised Land. We discover that Moses has passed away, and Joshua has been given the task of leading the children of Israel into the Promised Land. But we still have the same problem today that we had 40 years ago. The land is still inhabited with lots of people, the exact same people that terrified the children of Israel 40 years before. If the Israelites are going to take possession of the Promised Land, the promise that was made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're going to have to fight for it. The first city that they're going to have to go to battle with is this massive fortified city called Jericho. Look with me at our text, starting in Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there that night. I remember first hearing this story when I was a little boy. Joshua sends 2 spies into the city for a reconnaissance mission to see where there might be some kind of weaknesses they could take advantage of. And at that time, we focused on the spies, which is probably a much easier discussion to have with a room full of boys. All of us boys wanted to be spies. We had seen the TV shows, we had seen the movies. We would even play spy around the neighborhood. We practiced spying on our parents because, well, when you're 7 or 8 years old, being a spy is actually a dream job. You got to practice. But there's somebody else in the story, somebody with a nickname, Rahab. But we never just call her Rahab, do we? We always use the name that describes her. She was a prostitute, and there's really no reason to be bashful about it. It's a matter of historical record. Nearly every time that you read about her, you'll read her nickname. She was Rahab, the prostitute. She was the talk of the town, but nobody really talked to her. Men treated her like an object. Women treated her like a threat. She knew what contempt felt like. She knew what it felt like to be the punchline to a crude joke. Women despised her, they shunned her, men leered at her, joked about her, and visited her. I guess that's the price you pay when you work in the oldest profession. She was well known, but nobody would admit to knowing her. We're told that the spies end up at Rahab's house, which at first, in my mind, brings up a whole lot more questions than answers. I mean, of all the homes you could go to in the entire city of Jericho, why would you go to Rahab's house? Why would you visit the house of a prostitute? Actually, it probably wasn't their original destination. But as the sun is beginning to set, the two spies need to find a place with an awful lot of traffic, someplace where it wouldn't be unusual for strangers to just come and go, a place where discretion was a priority. Anybody seen going into that home, well, nobody would think that they're in there to draw up battle plans. I'm sure that people saw all kinds of guys going down the hallway to that door in the evening. So when you see a couple of out of town visitors walking down the hall, that would have been different, but it wasn't that different. So the spies duck into the house of ill repute, which happens to be built into the city walls. The story continues. The king of Jericho is told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." Before long, the king of Jericho learns about the spies and he sends messengers to Rahab's house. Now, we're not really sure how the king knew to go to Rahab's house. Maybe being a Hebrew did raise enough suspicion, or maybe the king knew if something nefarious was happening in town, Rahab would know about it. But for whatever reason, the cops show up and knock on her door, which is, I guess, a polite gesture. You know, Rahab's house probably wasn't the sort of place you just kind of barged into. Who knows how many other times Rahab had to hide a husband from an angry wife, or how many times she snuck somebody into a closet. But when she answers the door, Rahab is met with a message from the king. The messengers say, "We know that these Israelite spies have been here, and right now, this is a treasonous act." But Rahab's made a living by being a quick thinker. She tells the messengers, "Do you mean the two men who came by here, they were spies? Oh, they had no idea. They never said that they were in the city to spy on us. Oh no, that's awful. But they're not here now. Actually, they left before it got dark and we shut the city gate. But you know, that wasn't all that long ago. I bet if you leave right now, you'll probably be able to run them down and capture them. And you better hurry up because, well, you need to capture them." But all of that's a lie. Because scripture tells us that she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. You know, honestly, this is an uncomfortable story for a lot of different reasons. It's a story about a prostitute, which is, well, it's not a fun conversation to have with a 4-year-old. And not only that, she lies to the king's messengers. How do you deal with the fact that she blatantly lies and she ends up getting used by God? I want you to remember that we're looking at people who were righteous and broken, not righteous and perfect. Let me see if I can explain it to you this way. Remember back in your high school yearbook, there was a section where there were some pictures of students who were voted best dressed, most athletic, most likely to succeed. These students were supposed to be the best of your class. Yet, when I read the Bible and I look at the people that God chooses to use in the building of his kingdom, I'm not really sure that any of us would have voted any of them most likely to succeed. Actually, quite often, the exact opposite is true. God picks those voted most unlikely to succeed. He picks the ones that struggled with doubt, the ones that were schemers, the one with anger issues, people who were lost causes, people who were liars. It seems that God chooses the worst of the worst, people that we would call irredeemable, people like Rahab the prostitute. Even though prostitution was legal in the ancient world, it wasn't really something that you bragged about. I mean, there are some professions that you just don't print a business card for. In Rahab's days, prostitutes were viewed as the lowest rung of society. They lacked wisdom, they lacked morals, they lacked religious knowledge. And the fact that this woman plays a pivotal role in Israel's capture of Jericho is nothing short of a monumental reversal of expectations. After the authorities have cleared out, Rahab goes up to the roof, and we read, "Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, 'I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you.'" Did you catch that? She says, "I know that the Lord." What Lord? I mean, remember, she's a Canaanite. She worships an idol, a pagan god, if she even chooses to worship the gods of her people. But here she is on a rooftop acknowledging that Jehovah is God. She realizes that Yahweh is the one true God, and she knows this because of the stories that she's been told. She's heard about what happened at the Red Sea 40 years ago. She heard how the children of Israel defeated the Amorite kings of Shion and Og. Rahab's not a philosopher. She's not a theologian. But she's wise enough to understand that if a bunch of ragtag travelers wandering through the desert, if they can be successful and win battles, it's not because they did it on their own. Their God must be different than every other God we know about. So she tells the spies that as soon as the people in Jericho heard what happened, our hearts melted like wax. These stories about what your God has done has the entire city of Jericho afraid. Not of the Israelites, but of your God. Then she confesses that the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. And before she helps them escape, she asks them for a favor. She said, "I showed you mercy, now show my family mercy. When you come to take this city, and you're going to take this city, would you spare my family?" How could they refuse? Rahab helps the spies escape with a rope out of her window, and she instructs them how to leave the city undetected. Now, today we don't have time to read the rest of the story, but I'll tell you. The spies make it back to camp. They tell Joshua about Rahab, and they tell him about the promise that they've made to her. And when the children of Israel march around the city, she hangs a scarlet rope out of her window. She does that as an act of faith in the God she doesn't know. And when the walls of the city fall, Rahab and her family are saved. But what I really want to tell you is what happens next. You see, Rahab and her family, they don't just move and begin to live among the Israelite people. She actually becomes one of them. I would imagine the story plays out like this. One day she's minding her own business, and a man named Salmon comes and asks her if she'd like to have a cup of coffee or maybe go out to dinner. And while we don't know anything about the man, we do know that she says yes. And as the story's told, they get married. An Israelite man chooses a former pagan prostitute to be his wife. And after a little while, Rahab becomes pregnant. She has a son. And Salmon looks at his boy and names him Boaz. And Boaz would grow up and follow in his dad's footsteps. He would choose to marry another pagan woman who's chosen to live among the children of Israel, a woman from Moab, a woman named Ruth. Boaz and Ruth also have a child who will have a child, and eventually Rahab the prostitute, her great great grandson, will be named David, a little shepherd boy who eventually becomes the king of Israel. I love this story because it's one of those stories that makes me uncomfortable. Just When I feel like I've got everything all figured out, in those moments when we feel like we know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, the people who we have decided, well, this person is righteous and this person is unrighteous. I love the fact that God shows up and just kind of shifts the ground underneath our feet. Rahab's story highlights two dominant sins in the church: our prejudice and our privilege. I believe that they're actually two sides of the same coin. In our prejudice, we simply predetermine who God can and who he cannot work through. We make decisions about people based on what we know about them or what we perceive about them. We say, oh, well, God can never use that person because they don't have the right morals or the right education or the right history or the right background. They'll never be any use to God and his kingdom. After all, they're too sinful, too broken, too lazy, too helpless. Whatever it is, we make the decision that because we don't like them, God can't use them. And then we read the story of a woman named Rahab, the prostitute, and our prejudice gets shaken. Or maybe it's our privilege when we want to decide who has more value, more worth in God's kingdom. That person is important, and that person can do great things in the church because they're wealthy, they're smart, they're influential, they can sing or teach or say a beautiful prayer. So that has to be the kind of person that God can use in his kingdom. And then we read the story of Rahab the prostitute, and we're left wondering, what does she have to offer? The reason that I love this story so much is because it shines a spotlight on the fact that none of us have fallen so far away from God that he's not able to redeem us for work in his kingdom. Honestly, if I'm writing this story, I would have never told the story of Rahab, the prostitute. I mean, she's broken and tainted. And yet, God not only tells her story, he rejoices in telling her story because he needs us to know that just because you failed in the past doesn't mean that God can't reach you with his grace. Some of you know what it's like not to be able to get past your past. You live with this constant regret. You think about your mistakes, the choices, and the sins that you made still haunt you. You live in a persistent regret. You think, if only I had done this, or if only I hadn't done that, my life would be so much better. And because you can't get past your past, you suffer from depression, anxiety, fear. You have a constant sin of failure. Emotionally, you're numb. Spiritually, you're cold. That's why you need to hear Rahab's story. You need to hear the story of a woman who has a nickname. Because the truth is, you have your own past, which also means you have your own nickname. Maybe you did things you regret. Maybe you're so ashamed of your past life that you think about it every time you drive past a church building. Today, I want to remind you that the blood of Jesus was shed for the grossest of sins. And the blood of Jesus was shed for the sins that we've made socially acceptable, like greed and pride, gluttony, gossip, and self righteousness. In the church, all of the people that have been outcasts are treated as sons and daughters of God. Because in the church, because of his love, new life begins. Healing happens. And our Father shows himself to be compassionate beyond belief. He invites us to come to his table today because he wants to give us a new name, a new nickname. He wants us to be known as the children of God, the child of God, the son of God, the daughter of God, because God loved Rahab, not because she was perfect, but when Rahab began to understand the depth of God's love for her, she desired and longed to be like him, the one who invites us to the table, the one who loves us, not because we're perfect, but because we need the bread and we need the cup and we need the mercy and the grace of God, who invites us to come and to join him. I pray that you have a wonderful time around the table today, that as you take the emblems, you're able to think about your past, but more importantly, you're able to rejoice in the future that God offers you, a future that is filled with his presence and His peace and His love. I hope you have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you very soon.